All right, ready to have your mind tickled a bit?
Always up for some mental gymnastics.
Perfect, because today we're diving deep into The Mind is Flat by Nick Chater. It's all about how our brains work, or,
More
well,
like how we think they work.
right, how we think they work. So give us the overview. What's the core idea here?
Well, Chater, he argues our minds, they're not these like bottomless pools of thought and feeling,
Okay.
but something way more dynamic.
Dynamic, okay.
Almost, picture a flat surface that's always adapting, reshaping itself.
The mind is flat. Literally.
It's more powerful metaphor.
Yeah.
We talk about like deep thoughts or plumbing the depths of our emotions
Oh, yeah.
all the time. But he's saying that depth, that sense of depth, it's an illusion.
So when I think I'm having this, like, profound insight,
Yeah.
it's actually more surface level.
It's not that our thoughts are like shallow.
Yeah.
It's more that the feeling they come from some deep fixed place inside us, it's kind of misleading.
Hmm. Okay, so give me an example. Where do we see this flatness in action?
Okay, we'll think about introspection.
Okay.
We think we're digging into some hidden truth when we like examine our motivations, right?
Yeah.
But Chater argues a lot of times we're just constructing explanations like on the fly.
You're telling me all those times I tried to figure out why I did something? I
Yeah.
was basically just making stuff up to fit the situation.
Well, not necessarily making stuff up,
Okay.
but definitely engaging in some real-time, narrative creation.
Okay.
Our minds are constantly trying to make sense of things.
Right.
Sometimes the most available story is one that just fits the current context.
Right. It's easier to come up with a reason that sounds good in the moment than to really, like, dig deep.
Yeah.
Confront maybe an uncomfortable truth,
Yeah.
But wouldn't that kind of make us all unreliable narrators of our own lives?
Exactly. And that's where this idea of the mind as a storyteller comes in.
Okay.
Chater, he dives deep into this. He says we don't experience the world raw, but through this filter of constantly evolving narratives.
So give me a concrete example. How does this storytelling actually play out?
Okay, memory. We tend to think of memories as recordings,
Yeah.
but they're anything but.
Okay.
Every time you recall something, you're reconstructing that memory in the present moment.
Oh, interesting.
Influenced by your current emotional state,
Yeah.
new info you've got, even the context of why you're remembering it.
So it's not like hitting play on a video.
No, not at all.
Okay.
More like editing a film. Each time you access a memory, you're like tweaking scenes, adding music, maybe even casting a different actor.
Wow. Okay, I see what you mean about being a storyteller. It's like our brains are constantly drafting and redrafting our own personal histories. But if memory is so fluid, doesn't that mean our sense of self is also kind of shaky?
Right. And that's where things get even more interesting. If we're always shaping our memories, interpretations of the past, how solid is our sense of identity, really?
I have a feeling this is where the mind is flat idea really starts to challenge how we see ourselves.
It does. If our minds are more adaptable than we think, always responding to context, weaving narratives,
Yeah.
what does that mean for our sense of self, beliefs, even our deep preferences?
All right, color me intrigued. Let's dig into that more after a quick break.
When you really start to think about this flat mind idea,
Yeah.
it raises some pretty big questions about, how we understand ourselves, how we make choices.
That's where I'm getting stuck, honestly. We've talked about this illusion of depth, how our minds construct narratives.
Right.
But what does that actually mean for, like, my daily life? Am I just, like, at the mercy of whatever story my brain decides to cook up?
Not exactly. Chater's point is not that we're like helpless pawns of our minds.
Okay.
It's more like understanding this dynamic nature, this flatness.
Yeah.
That gives us more agency, not less.
Okay, I'm going to need you to explain that one, because right now it feels like the opposite. If my brain is always weaving these narratives, how am I supposed to trust my own judgment?
Yeah.
Make decisions, with any kind of confidence.
That's where the power context comes in.
Yeah.
He argues that our environment, our experiences, even those fleeting emotions, they all play a huge role in shaping those narratives.
Okay.
And the more aware we are of those influences, the more we can start to exert conscious control.
So it's about recognizing, like, the puppet strings, so to speak, and
Yeah.
figuring out how to move to a different stage.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
Think about it. You're feeling anxious.
Okay.
Your instinct might be to think, oh, I'm just an anxious person. And just accept that as like part of who you are.
Oh, yeah, been there. Easy trap to fall into.
But what if instead you paused
Mm.
and considered the context?
Okay.
Are you in a stressful environment, haven't slept well? Are you like surrounded by people who amplify that anxiety?
Okay.
Suddenly that anxiety, it might not feel like a personality trait, but a response to your circumstances.
I see where you're going with this. By recognizing those external influences, we can potentially change them, or at least change how we react.
Precisely. Chater says understanding this adaptability, it allows us to reframe how we approach, things like education, therapy, even business.
Okay, let's get into some specifics. How does this flat mind idea change how we think about education, for example?
Well, traditionally we focused on like finding a student's innate talent or trying to pinpoint their learning style.
Right.
But if we accept that the mind is constantly adapting, reshaping itself,
Yeah.
that approach seems a bit misguided.
So instead of searching for some hidden genius within, we should focus on creating environments that, foster that adaptability.
Exactly. Imagine classrooms designed not to deliver information,
Yeah.
but to, cultivate curiosity, encourage exploration.
I love that. It's less about finding the right box to put someone in, more about giving them the tools to build their own boxes, or maybe even just do away with boxes altogether.
Right. And you can apply this same principle to therapy, too.
Therapy. Okay, I'm curious how this fits in. It seems like therapy is all about, digging deep into the past, uncovering those root causes.
You're right. But a flat mind perspective, it suggests something different. Instead of fixating on those deep-seated issues,
Yeah.
what if we focused on managing present circumstances? Understanding how our current context is shaping us, and then developing strategies to navigate those influences more effectively.
So instead of tell me about your childhood, it's more tell me about your week.
Yeah, in a sense, it's not about denying the impact of the past,
Okay.
but recognizing that the mind is always constructing itself in the present. We have more power than we think to, shift our perspectives, change behaviors, even create new narratives about who we are, what we can do.
This is making me think about those, self-help books that talk about the power of positive thinking. Is that kind of what we're getting at here?
It's related.
Yeah.
But I think Shader goes deeper. It's not just about thinking happy thoughts. It's about understanding those underlying mechanisms of how our minds work, how they shape our reality, and then how we can actually leverage that to become more active in our own lives.
That's much more empowering than just trying to, will ourselves into happiness.
And what's interesting is this flat mind idea. It isn't just for individuals,
Oh, okay.
It has implications for how we structure organizations, how we lead teams, make decisions, all kinds of stuff.
Okay, let's talk business then. I'm picturing a world where CEOs are all reading The Mind is Flat, and suddenly traditional corporate hierarchies are flipped on their heads.
Maybe not that dramatic,
Oh,
but there's definitely potential here. Imagine leaders embracing this idea in their employees. Instead of looking for, the perfect fit for a role, they prioritize adaptability, creativity, willingness to learn and evolve.
So instead of hiring for specific skills, they're hiring for, potential and growth mindset.
Exactly. And think how this could transform decision-making.
Hmm.
Instead of clinging to, rigid plans,
Right.
companies become more agile, more responsive to change, more willing to experiment and adapt as new information comes up.
It's like the difference between, I don't know, trying to navigate a ship through a storm with a fixed map
Yeah.
versus having a compass and the ability to adjust course as needed.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this flat mind concept so exciting. It challenges so much of what we think we know about, how the world works, and it opens up all these possibilities for how we learn, how we grow, how we create.
All right, I'm sold on the superpower aspect now, but I'm also wondering if our minds are so malleable, so influenced, does that mean there's no such thing as, a true self?
Ah, that's the question, right? And I think that's one that Chater addresses with a lot of nuance and insight in this last part of the book.
Well, let's not keep our listeners waiting. I'm ready to unpack the rest of this, see how it all ties together. Okay, we're back, ready to wrap up this deep dive into The Mind is Flat. We've talked about the illusion of depth, the mind as a storyteller, how this flatness can be used in things like education and business.
And I think we've made it clear, this flatness, it's not a bad thing. It's really this incredible ability to adapt, really sets humans apart.
But I'm still kind of stuck on that question of self, you know? If our minds are so changeable, so shaped by context, does that mean there's no real me at the core?
It's the big question, isn't it? And Chater, he tackles this head on here. Says that our sense of self, it's not this fixed thing.
Okay.
It's more like an ongoing project.
Yeah.
Always under construction. We're putting it together, taking it apart, based on experiences, relationships, the stories we tell ourselves.
But there is a self. It's
Yeah.
just, it's more fluid, more dynamic than we tend to think.
Exactly. And one of the coolest examples he uses is this choice blindness experiment.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Have you?
Vaguely. Remind me how it works.
Okay, so researchers, they showed people pairs of pictures, like two faces, asked them to choose which one they find more attractive,
Okay.
and then they do this sneaky swap sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So the person ends up with the face they didn't choose.
Wait, so they were tricked into thinking they picked something else?
Exactly. And the crazy part is most people, they don't even notice the switch.
No way.
Yeah. They'll explain why they prefer that face, the one they didn't even pick,
Wow.
as if it were their original choice.
So they're totally convinced they made a choice they didn't actually make.
Yes. And this shows us something super interesting about how our minds work. We're always making up stories to explain what we do, even when those stories, they don't match reality.
That's wild, but if even our preferences can be so fluid, what does that mean for bigger things? Our values, our beliefs, even our sense of purpose?
It suggests that those things, they're not set in stone either.
Yeah.
Shaped by experiences, influenced by our environment, constantly being revised as we learn new things and just live our lives.
So it's not about saying these things don't exist.
No, no.
It's about recognizing they're not static. They can change.
Right. And that could be really freeing, actually. We're not stuck with some predetermined destiny. We can shape our own sense of self, evolve our values, even rewrite our stories as we go.
I'm seeing why Chater calls this flatness a superpower now. It means we're not limited by some fixed idea of who we are.
And he goes on to say that this constant, building and rebuilding, that's what lets us adapt, learn, create, thrive in a world that's always changing.
That's a much more hopeful way to look at it than feeling trapped by the past or some, set of characteristics we're just born with. But it also makes me wonder, if our minds are so easily influenced, what about personal responsibility? If our choices are shaped by context, can we really be held accountable for what we do?
It's a good question. And Chater says, understanding this flatness, it doesn't wipe away responsibility, it just gives it a new definition. It means taking ownership not just for our actions, but for the mental landscape behind those actions.
So instead of saying, I did this because I'm this type of person, it's more about asking, what factors led to this choice and how can I change those factors going forward?
Exactly. It's about that interplay between what's going on inside us and what's happening around us, and knowing that we have more power than we think to shape both.
This whole conversation, it's making me think about free will in a different way. It's not about ignoring external influences. It's more about understanding how we can work with them to shape our own path.
I think that's a great point. And in the end, that's what makes this book so powerful. It makes us rethink how the mind works, and it gives us the power to become like architects of our own mental world.
So as we finish up this deep dive into The Mind is Flat, what's the one thing you want our listener to take away?
I think
Yeah.
the biggest takeaway is that the mind is way more adaptable than we realize. It's not a weakness, it's our greatest strength. It lets us learn, grow, change, create incredible things.
Well said. And for you listening, the challenge now is to think about how this new understanding of the mind can impact your own life. If our minds are constantly shaping our reality, can you become a more conscious architect of your own mental narrative? What stories will you choose to tell yourself? How will you use this knowledge to shape your own journey? Those are some questions to think about as you move forward. Thanks for joining us on this exploration. Until next time, keep those minds curious.